Ezra Hashem. Ezra Hashem. Today's daf is going to be Ezra Hashem. Today's daf is going to be Metzia daf Kuf Gimel, and we're starting from daf Kuf Beis Amid Beis towards the bottom, like the 7 lines from the bottom. Okay, so the Gemara asks a question. Gemara asks very simple questions and back and forth. Very easy Gemara today. Boy Minei Rabbi Yanai. They asked a question for Rabbi Yanai. The yeshiva boys asked a question to Rabbi Yanai. And this is a renter-landlord situation. Soicher Omar Nasati. The renter says, I paid the rent. Umaskir Omar, but the landlord says, Lo natalti, I never took money from you. Almi lahavi ra'aya. Who has to prove the point? Does the landlord have to prove that he did not receive anything, or does the renter have to prove that he gave the money? Hold on, Sheldon just arrived. Hi, Sheldon. We just began.
Hi.
Just began. It's the Kuf Beis Amid Beis, and towards the bottom. Oh, here's Alan. Okay, here we go. Okay, so Boy Minei Rabbi Yanai. Kuf Beis Amid Beis towards the bottom. They asked the question for Rabbi Yanai. Soicher Omer Nesati, if the renter says, I gave rent, Umaskir Omer, but the landlord says, Lo natalti, I didn't take anything from you. Almi lahavi raya, who has to bring, upon who is the burden of proof? Okay? That's the question of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, Amos, when did this disagreement occur? If it's in the term of the rental. Now, they used to pay rent, not like today. When the rental agreement is up, that's when you pay the rent. So if you rented for a year, so you paid rent at the end of the year, not that you pay the rent prior to taking possession. So Gemara says like this: if there's still time on the rental, the lease is not yet up. So then, Tanina, we have a Mishnah to that. If it's after the rental agreement, let's say the rental agreement was for a year, and a year and a quarter later, they have this disagreement, did he pay the rent or not? So Tanina, that is also a Mishnah, and it's a very simple Mishnah. The Tanah we learned to the Mishnah, a Bechor is obligated in case his father did not give Pidyon Aben. So then his father, and his father has died. Then it's upon the person himself to give the Pidyon Aben. Okay, when he gets bar mitzvah. Beis ha'av, if a father dies during the first 30 days of the child, so then we don't know. Maybe the father advanced payment to the kohen, and therefore the son, already had his pidyon ben. So the Mishnah says it's not true. Becheskas, we are on the assumption shaloi nifta, that he did not get a pidyon ben. Ad shiavri raya shenifta. He has to prove, the burden of proof upon him is that he got his pidyon ben. But if it's after 30 days, then we can assume that he did get his pidyon ben, because until somebody can say, oh, your father did not do the pidyon ben. See, to advance the money to the kohen, that nobody does. But once the obligation to paida your son occurred, we can assume the father followed through on his obligation to paida his son, to redeem his son, and so that even if he died, the son can assume that his father did give him a pidyon ben. So the idea of this Mishnah is that no one pays things early. So if this rental disagreement, if he paid the rent or not, occurred, so it's a very simple Mishnah. If it occurred prior to the obligation of the renter giving the rent, that means that the lease term is not up, because again, they used to pay the rent at the end of the lease term. So we can assume that the renter did not pay the rent. And if it's after the lease term, then we can assume that the renter did pay the rent, and then the landlord has to prove that he didn't receive anything. So what was the question of the yeshiva boys to Rabbi Yanai? Answers the Gemara, like tzricha, we need it. It's the day. It's very interesting. The question was the day of the end of the lease term. So the day of where the term ends, and the question is like this. And the renter says, "I gave it to you in the morning," and the landlord says, "I didn't receive anything." Me avid inish the para b'yomed the mishlem zimnein. Does a person pay the rent on the day that it's due right away in the morning, or does he delay it to the afternoon? Or no, or he doesn't, and he'll give it over at the last second before the day is out to pay the rent. Rabbi Yochanan said Tinisiu. This is also a Mishnah. We go on the Chuf Gimel Amarav. Soche bismanoi, soche bismanoi nishba v'noitel. If a worker during the period of time that he finished his work, now he's claiming he did not receive his wages. All he has to do is swear and he didn't receive his wages, and he could take. Now, normally a person who the one that swears is the one that is being claimed against. You always swear, that you don't owe anything, and you're exempt from paying. Here we see that the claimant, the worker, says I didn't get paid, and it's very different. That we put it on the worker, and the worker says I didn't get paid, and we believe the worker. Now, why do we believe the worker? Why shouldn't we make the owner say that, oh, I paid you? So the reason is, Sochir, a worker, Durami Rabbanim Shvua Alay. The rabbis put a shvua on him because he knows for sure if he got paid or not. Mishum the Balabayas, Torad B'Pay Alov, because the owner is the employer is busy with the worker, so he doesn't know if he paid or not. There's so many different workers that he has to care for. Aval Hacham over here, here we will say that the renter could say, I don't owe you any money. I paid my rent and he could swear I paid the rent, and that's it. So since he's the one that they claimed against, the landlord said you didn't pay me the rent, he can swear I paid the rent, and it's called a shvuas hesed, and therefore he will be exempt from paying. Nu Gemara, Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman. Rava said in the name of Rav Nachman, Haiman the oigel lebeisa lechavri le'asa shnin. A guy rented a house for 10 years from his friend, the cost of leishtara, and they wrote a document, a renter document. Now, but the crazy thing about this was it didn't say when the document was signed. Now, we don't know when the start of the 10 years happened. And now a period of time comes, and the renter, the owner of the land, says, hey, you already stayed in this land for 5 years. And the renter says, that's not true. I'm only here for 3 years, and I have still 7 years left on my contract. Okay, so the Mishnah says, meheman. Okay, so that's what he says, meheman. The owner is believed, because since the karka belongs to him, the land belongs to him, so therefore we trust him more than the renter. Amalei Rav Achim Tifti Ravina, so Rav Achim from this said to Ravina, Elamiata, based on this logic, I'm going to say like this: if someone lent somebody 100 zuz with a star, right, and he lent somebody, and v'amalei, and the person who he's claiming against says, praticha palga, I paid you half. Hachinami de mehemin, would you believe him? In other words, the renter has a claim against the owner of the land that he has 7 years on the contract, and the owner of the land says, no, I already gave you 2 years, and therefore you only have 5 years left on the contract. Why do we believe the owner? If anytime you have a claim against somebody, if the guy says, oh, I took care of that claim already, in fact, I owe you 100 zuz, I paid half. Are you going to say that person is believed? We don't say that person is believed. So why over here do we say the owner of the land is believed? That was the question Rav Acha asked Ravina. Amalei, so he said like this, how can you make a comparison? Hasam, over there, shtar l'guvainikai. A loan is supposed to be collectible. Im isa de parei, if it's true that the borrower actually paid, iboile lemichtav agabe, he should have written, cross out the original document and say, we now owe half. Oi, inami michtav alei tavra, or he should have written a receipt on it. So therefore, that is an indication that the borrower is not saying the truth. Aval hacha, over here, by a guy rented a field from his friend for 10 years. So we don't know how many years elapsed Amalei So the renter could say, "Hi, the kisivilach shara." The landlord could say, the owner of the land can say, the reason why I wrote this document, so you shouldn't say, oh, I purchased the land. So the document clearly says it was rented but not purchased. And therefore, we're going to believe the owner of the land because there's no other way to say, oh, something should have been done to indicate that the owner is saying the truth. There's nothing he can do. He wrote a document, and the document says that it's rented for 10 years. There's nothing more. So therefore, we will believe the owner if he says that 5 years passed versus the renter saying only 3 years passed on the loan. Omar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, let's say you see a vessel belonging to somebody, to your friend, and you say to him, I want to lend it forever, as long as it's usable, right? The guy has an extra hammer, and you say, lend me this hammer forever. So that's a possibility. You could do that. Amar Rav Nachman, Shoel Adam Betuvay L'Olam. A person could rent a vessel belonging to his friend forever, and as long as it's workable with this hammer, then it's good. But if it breaks, you have to return the pieces back to the owner because it's still a loan. So that's what we're saying over here. Amar Rav Mari Berei Demar Shmuel who the the only condition is you can borrow something forever is if you make a kinyan. If you say a kinyan that this is borrowed forever, somehow you make a motion of an acquisition. But if you didn't do a kinyan, so when you return it the first time, so the whole transaction ends right then and there. So you have to make a kinyan, so to speak, a motion that indicates that you both agree that you have a free hand to borrow this hammer whenever you need it. Alma Rav Mari Berei Ravashi Umahadle Kate. That's like I said before. When it becomes unusable, then you have to return the broken pieces back to the original owner. Because again, he didn't give it to you as a gift, he gave it to you as a loan forever. And therefore, when it's not usable anymore, you have to give it back. Omar Rava. Rava said, Hi man da Omar Lechavri. Man says to his friend, Oishlin Mora Lemirke Be Har Pedesa. I want to borrow your hoe to use for this garden. So for this particular garden, so the Gemara says, Rafik be ahu perdesa. Then he has to only use it for that particular garden, because that was the loan. It's for this particular garden. Perdesa, but if you said garden, so Rafik be called perdesa the boy, then you have a choice to use any garden that you own. If you own like 5 gardens, you could pick one, and that was the one that you borrowed the hoe for. But if you said perdesa, my gardens, I'm borrowing this hoe to use for my gardens, period. Rafik veva also called partus of the islay. You can use it for all the gardens that you have, even if it's used as even if you have one garden that's is huge, and it's a high chance that the thing is going to break, no problem. And you return the broken pieces back to the owner because he's understood that you have a free hand to borrow this thing forever. So basically what the Gemara is saying is it's possible to borrow something, and even if it breaks, you're not held responsible as long as you return the broken pieces back to its owner. Normally a borrower has high liability, but if you borrow something forever, and by saying I'm using it for my gardens, basically you're saying it forever. So therefore, you can use it as long as it's usable, but once it becomes unusable, you return it back to its owner. Amra Papa Rav Papa said, Hi man da Amalei Lechavre. A person said to his friend, Oishin lei hai gagusa, Oishin lei hai gagusa. I want you to lend me this well of water so I can use it to irrigate my field, to water my fields. So v'nafla, and then it broke apart. The well came apart. Loy banalei. You don't have to, if you want to build it and lend it to me ever, the owner can say, I lent it to you as is. Now it became unusable. Even if you want to rebuild it, I'm not lending it to you anymore. Gargusa v'nafle. But if he said gargusa, right? He didn't say hi gargusa, this well. He said a well. Okay, so then v'naflan, this well broke apart. So then once the borrower Bonile builds it up, he could use it without asking the guy anymore, because the guy said, "I'm lending you a well, not this well." And this, and you can if the well that you're using broke apart, you can build it up again. Bega gusa, but if he said, this lend me bega gusa, that means a place so I can dig a well, right? Bega gusa, a place for a well. He can like start digging all upon his property and start finding a well. And that's a very interesting thing. God gave you a free hand to dig up his property to find water. But you have to make a kinyan, because if he didn't make a kinyan, the guy could say, "Oh, I was just joking around with you," and back out. So if you make a kinyan, that's firm. Then you have the right to dig up his whole property to find water. Next Mishnah. Hamaskir bayis lechaveira v'nofal. A man rented a house from his friend. V'nofal, and the house collapsed. So then, chayiv lahamad lebayis. Then you have to replace the house. Now, during the rental period, right? Because you promised that you're going to rent him a house, and the house collapsed. You have to replace it. Hoya kotan. If you rented him a small house, lo yasenu gadol. You can't replace it with a big house. Maybe because the guy in particular wanted to rent a small house. Gadol. If you rented a big house, lo yasenu kotan. You can't make it a smaller house. Echad, if you rented one house, lo yasenu shnaim, you can't say, "Oh, I rented you a big house, so now that collapsed, I'm going to replace it with two small ones." No. Shnaim, if he rented two houses and that they collapsed, lo yasenu echad, you can't replace it with one house. You have to really have replace the house similar to the one that you rented. And you can't cheapen out over here. Lo yivchos min hachalonis, you can't give less windows than the original house had. But you don't have to add on to it. You can't add to it because maybe the other person doesn't want new windows. Unless they both agree. So Mishnah says a straight out statement that if a house collapses, you have to replace it. So the Gemara asks the question, Hey Chedomi, what is the case that I rented somebody a house and it collapsed? I'm obligated to replace the house. If my contract said, I am renting you this particular house, nafal azalei, this particular house collapsed and it's gone. So why should the owner of the house have to replace it? Id amalei bayistam, if he said, I'm renting you a house, echad, so if there was one house that he rented and that collapsed, amai lo yasen shnaim, why is he not allowed to make it into two? Cotton, if it was a small house, amai lo yasenu gadol, why can't he replace it with a big house? He said, I'm renting you a house, so it doesn't matter. If the original house I rented you was small and that collapsed, why can't I replace it with a big house? So what is the case that the Mishnah is specific that you have to replace it with a similar house that you rented? Amar Shlokish, exactly what you're thinking. The Amalei, he said, Bayesh ani maskilecha midas arke kach v'kach. That the house, he said, I'm renting you a house that has this and this length. So he gave exact dimensions in the contract, the original contract, of what kind of house he's renting. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, what is the novelty of that? Of course you have to replace it. That was the original document. He said, he said, I'm renting you a similar house to this. So again, remember, what is the novelty? If he says, I'm renting you a house like this, so of course, if it collapses, you have to replace it. That was the original deal. You're renting somebody a house. You didn't say this particular house. You said, I'm going to rent you a similar house to the original house. So a similar house. The answer is like this. The Koya Agudit Danhara. The original house had a view by the water. Let's say it was a beach view. So therefore, I would think that you don't have to replace the exact dimensions of the house. You just have to replace it so that it has the same view. So Mao, the same in my Kazeh, when he said, I'm renting you this house, the Koya Agudit Danhara. What you meant in the document was that it was a house that had a view of the water. but not that you have to replace it with something similar to the original dimensions of the first house that you rented. Kamash Malan, that's what the Mishnah is teaching you. That when you rented the house, you were not saying that I'm renting this. When you originally rented the house, you're saying a house that has a beach view, and you also meant the dimensions of the first house. So if that collapsed, the landlord committed to rent something like that. So he has to replace it with something similar. Again, it has to have a view, and it has to be similar to the original size of the original house that you're entering. So now the next Mishnah begins. Someone who took responsibility from his friend. Let's say that he doesn't own the field, but he's going to work the field. He's going to work the field, and a guy says, I'm going to work the field, and I'm going to get, let's say, a third of the profits. So if you're just working the field, it's called a sharecropper arrangement. Malcolm Shahano Liktar. If the minig of the sharecroppers of that place is to cut the field, Yikzer, then you're supposed to do the cutting of the field. La'akar, if the minig of the place was that you uproot what grows in the field, Ya'akar, you have to uproot it. Plow after the field. Obligated to plow after the field. Because why would a person plow right after he cut the field and harvested the field? Because to harvest the weeds so that they die and they don't come back when you're going to replant the field. The Mishnah says you have to follow the laws of the land of what a sharecropper is, and if a sharecropper took the commitment, he has to follow the minhag, the rules of the country that he's in. Kishem shecholkim betvua, just like a sharecropper with the owner divide up the produce of the ground. Kach cholkim betevin of kash, so they can split the straw, that the animal fodder of the field. Kishem shecholkim biyayin, just like they split the wine. Kal cholkim, says the Mishnah, we go on the page, bizmoires, with the branch vines, uvakonim, and the sticks that hold up the vine. We're going to see what that is in the Gemara. Ushneim misapkin as a konim, and they both the owner of the land and the sharecropper have to provide new poles that hold up each year the vine, because the sharecropper, his job is only to work the field and guard the field, but other responsibilities belong to the owner of the field. Tanan, we learned in a brisa. If the minig of a sharecropper is just to cut the field, then he's not allowed to uproot. The reason why you just leave a little stubble, but you're not allowed to uproot the produce. La'akar, if the minig is to uproot the field, you're not allowed to cut the field. And if somebody wants to change the minig, they both could say, hey, that's not the minig. Our minig is to cut. You can't uproot. For the minig is to uproot, you can't cut. Now, why would somebody want to cut a field? And why would somebody want to uproot a field? So we're going to say like this. If the minig is to cut the field, you're not allowed to uproot field. Hi, Omar, the owner of the field can say, I don't want you to uproot the field. But ina de titfen le ara. I want that there should be a little stubble on the field so that I will have like fertilizer for the next year. V'hai Amar, and the other one could say, Loy Metzina, I'm not going to be around next year to do it. So let me uproot. Let me take that last piece of produce that I didn't pull out of the ground. Again, la'akar einer shar liktzer. But let's say the minig was to uproot the field. You're not allowed, the sharecropper can say, no, I'm going to just cut it and leave a little stubble on the ground. Hi Omar, the owner of the fields can say, but in the tinakir I want my field to look super clean, so I want you to clean it off by uprooting. Hi Omar, and the other one could say, "Be'ina tivna, I want this little straw I want the straw." So therefore, each one could say, what's the reason why they're not following the rules of the land? So you always have to follow the rules of the land, and each one could stop the other one if he's not following the basic rules of the Medina. Ushneim akvin zazah lamali. So the answer is that's the. What do you mean? Why is they both could stop each other? So the Gemara explains, what is that? telling you that part of the brisa? So the answer is the Gemara, ma tam kama. It's an explanation. Ma tam liktsar, ein rishon lakar, lakar, ein rishon liksar. Why can you break away and do the opposite of what the normal custom is? Because the one that's not following the custom can be prevented from doing so from his counterparty. Okay, we're going to do another 2 more minutes, and then we'll stop. Lachroish, achrav yachroish. If the minig is to plow afterwards, after you harvested the field, then it's the sharecropper who has to harvest the field after he cut the field. Says the Gemara Pshita, isn't that simple? Like tzricha, we don't need it. The aksrei de lemenakshe, the aksrei in a city that you don't weed out the field. And he said v'nachash, and he weeded out the field. Maya the same. He could have said like this. Amalei, the sharecropper could say, "Hi, the nachisha. The reason why I weeded out the field, so I don't have to do another plowing of the field. I took already the weeds. Why am I going to plow the plow it again?" Kamash Malam, the Mishnah is telling you the boyale lefrushale. If he's going to like bypass the minhag Medina, and he's trying to accomplish the same thing, he has to explain to him, I'm not going to plow your field, I'm going to just weed it. And because that's the whole point of plowing the field again. And the fact that he didn't explain why he's doing what he's doing, therefore, he would not be able to, he has to plow the field again. Hakol kamina kamedi. You have to follow whatever the meaning of the medina is. Hakol latuyamai. What is that coming to include? It's coming to teach you what the rabbis taught us. If you rent a field, do you get the trees or do you not get the trees? You rented a field, a wheat field, and there's a few trees on the property. Do you have a right to those trees? So it depends what the custom is. If the custom is you get it, you get it. If not, not. So the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? If the minig is that you get it, what's the novelty? Like Tzrika, the answer is like this: every owner of the field usually takes a third of the profits. And this owner decided he's going to say, I'm taking a quarter of the profits. Now he's going down for a reason. So maybe Ma'odisema, even though he didn't explain himself why he's taking less than the normal owners of property, because he could say the Amalei, hi the Batsri Loch, the reason why I'm taking a quarter, not a third, which is my right to say as the owner of the field, is because it's because it's understood that I'm not going to give you the trees. Kamash Malan, he should have expressed that. And if he didn't express it, then we follow what the custom of the land is. And the custom of the land is that you do get the trees. One more piece, and then we'll stop. So that's a Gwen Pshita. If the minig is that when you rent the field, you don't get the trees, so you don't get the trees. So Pshita isn't that obvious. Like Tzricha, the answer is the opposite. The Chiddush is the opposite. The Kuli Alma Makabale Beriva. Everybody gets a quarter. Every owner would only get 25%. And this owner demanded that he's getting a third. Mahu the same. I could have thought Amalei. So the owner could say, the sharecropper could say, "Hi, the taf the loch. Why am I giving you more to your share than a normal sharecropper? In other words, why am I giving the owner of the field a third when he normally should get only a quarter? Adaitid you have to leave me alone because the condition was that you're going to give me the trees. That's why I'm giving you more. But that's not the custom of that land, and you didn't express that." So Kamash Milam, the boile that you should have expressed it. The fact that you didn't express it, therefore you don't get it. Basically, even if you arrange the contract in such a way and you're doing something that's different, as long as you didn't verbally express why you're making this change, you always have to follow the custom of the land. Okay, these are sharecropping arrangements, and that's where we'll end it right here.